Judge Patricia Harrington straightened the papers on her desk and glanced at the clock. It was almost 3 in the afternoon, and she still had 5 more cases to get through before she could call it a day. 25 years of sitting behind this bench had taught her to spot trouble the moment it walked through those courtroom doors. And right now, trouble was shuffling in wearing an oversized gray hoodie and sneakers that had seen better days. The boy couldn't have been more than 16 years old. His hair was messy, falling into his eyes, and he kept his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world than standing in her courtroom. Patricia felt a familiar wave of frustration wash over her. Another kid who'd gotten himself into a mess and didn't take it seriously enough to even dress properly for court. The bailiff called the case. Trespassing at Sterling and Associates, one of the biggest law firms in the city. Patricia raised her eyebrows. That was interesting. Those fancy lawyers didn't mess around when it came to protecting their property. Someone must have really wanted to make an example out of this kid. State your name for the record, Patricia said, not bothering to hide the tiredness in her voice. Daniel Cooper, Your Honor, the boy replied. His voice was quiet but steady. Patricia looked around the courtroom, searching for parents, a guardian, anyone who might be responsible for this child. The gallery was mostly empty except for a few people waiting for other cases and a bored-looking journalist in the back row. Where are your parents, young man? Patricia asked, leaning forward slightly. They're not here, Your Honor. I can see that. Why aren't they here? Daniel shifted his weight from one foot to the other. They live overseas. They know about this case. Patricia rubbed her temples. Great, just great. And where is your attorney? I don't have one, Your Honor. I'll be representing myself. The courtroom went silent for a moment, and then someone in the back let out a small laugh. Someone else coughed to cover up what was probably another laugh. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine with surprise written all over her face. Patricia felt her patience wearing thin. Son, do you understand what you're charged with? Do you have any idea how serious this is? Yes, Your Honor. I understand the charges completely. Then you should understand that representing yourself is a terrible idea. You know what they say. A person who represents himself has a fool for a client. Patricia used her sternest voice, the one she reserved for people who needed a reality check. I'm going to strongly suggest that you request a public defender. We can postpone this hearing until, with respect, Your Honor, I decline. I wish to represent myself. I understand my rights, and I'm making this choice knowingly and voluntarily. Patricia stared at him. The kid was polite, she'd give him that. But politeness wasn't going to help him when the prosecution tore him apart. She'd seen this movie before. Some teenager watches a few legal dramas on TV and thinks they can outsmart the system. It never ended well. Mr. Cooper, I need to make sure you understand what you're doing here. This isn't a game. This isn't like what you see on television. If you're convicted, you could face serious consequences. A criminal record at your age could affect your entire future. College applications, job opportunities, everything. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand, Your Honor. I still wish to proceed. Patricia let out a long sigh. She couldn't force him to take a lawyer if he didn't want one. As long as he understood what he was giving up, the law said he had the right to represent himself, no matter how foolish that choice might be. Fine. Against my better judgment, I'm going to allow you to proceed pro se, but I'm warning you right now. I won't give you any special treatment just because you're young or because you chose not to hire an attorney. You'll be held to the same standards as any lawyer in this courtroom. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Patricia shook her head slightly and gestured to the prosecution table. Mr. Walsh, you may begin. The assistant district attorney stood up, adjusting his tie with a slight smirk on his face. Kevin Walsh had been with the DA's office for about 8 years, and he was good at his job. Maybe a little too confident sometimes, but he knew how to build a case. Patricia almost felt sorry for Daniel. This was going to be like watching a lion play with a mouse. Walsh started laying out the prosecution's case in his smooth, practiced voice. On the night of August 15th, security cameras caught Daniel entering the offices of Sterling and Associates at 11:47 p.m. The building was closed. He had no authorization to be there. Security guards found him in one of the partners' offices, going through confidential files on a computer. When they confronted him, he didn't run or resist. He simply told them he was looking for something important. As Walsh talked, Patricia watched Daniel. The boy was listening carefully, occasionally writing something down on a beat-up legal pad he'd pulled from his backpack. He didn't look nervous exactly, more like he was studying everything, taking it all in. It reminded her of how law students looked during their first trial observation, absorbing every detail, learning the rhythm of the courtroom. Maybe the kid was smarter than he looked. Maybe he'd at least put up a decent effort before Walsh demolished his case. Patricia settled back in her chair, prepared to watch what she assumed would be a quick and painful lesson in why people hire lawyers. She had no idea that in the next hour, this scruffy teenager was about to completely turn her world upside down. Kevin Walsh was enjoying himself. Patricia could tell by the way he paced in front of the witness stand, his hands clasped behind his back like he was giving a lecture. He called his first witness, Tony Rodriguez, the head security guard who'd caught Daniel that night. Tony was a big guy with gray hair and the kind of steady voice that made him sound credible. He'd been working security for 15 years and he knew how to tell his story. Walsh walked him through the events of August 15th. Yes, he'd seen someone on the security monitors. No, that person didn't have any authorization to be there. Yes, he'd confronted the intruder in Mr. Blackwell's office. The intruder was this young man right here, Daniel Cooper. Walsh smiled and turned to Daniel. Your witness. Patricia expected Daniel to fumble through a few basic questions, maybe ask something he'd seen in a movie. Instead, the boy stood up and something changed. His shoulders straightened. He walked toward the witness stand with calm, measured steps. When he spoke, his voice was clearer, more confident. Mr. Rodriguez, you testified that you saw me on the security monitors at 11:47 p.m., correct? That's right. And you said the building was closed at that time? Yes, we close at 9 p.m. on weekdays. Daniel nodded, glancing at his notes. When you saw me on the monitor, which camera feed were you watching? Tony shifted slightly. The one covering the third-floor hallway. Just to be clear, you were in the security office on the ground floor watching a monitor? Yes. How many monitors are in the security office? Tony paused. 12. 12 monitors showing different camera feeds throughout the building? That's correct. Daniel picked up a piece of paper from his table. According to the incident report you filed, you first noticed suspicious activity at 11:47, but you didn't arrive at Mr. Blackwell's office until 12:03. That's 16 minutes. Can you explain why it took you 16 minutes to reach the third floor? Patricia sat up straighter. That was a good question. A very good question. Tony cleared his throat. Well, I had to check a few other things first. Make sure it wasn't just a glitch in the system. A glitch in the system, Daniel repeated slowly. How often do you get glitches? Not often. Maybe once a month. So when you saw someone on camera at 11:47, you thought it might be a glitch. I had to be sure. Mr. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you were actually watching a different monitor when I appeared on camera? That you didn't actually see me enter the building at 11:47? Tony's face reddened slightly. I saw you on the camera. But you didn't see me enter the building, did you? You saw me already inside, walking down the hallway. There's a difference. Walsh stood up. Objection. Is there a question here? Patricia nodded. Sustained. Get to your point, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Rodriguez, according to the security logs, which I've reviewed, the main entrance door was opened at 9:37 p.m. that evening. Almost 2 hours before you claimed to have first seen me. Is that correct? Tony looked uncomfortable.
I'd have to check the logs. I have them right here. Daniel held up another paper.
The system logged a door entry at 9:37 p.m. using a valid keycard. Whose keycard was it? I don't remember. You don't remember or you don't want to say? Patricia leaned forward. This was getting interesting. Very interesting. Daniel continued, his voice still calm and measured. Let me ask you this. When you found me in Mr. Blackwell's office, did I try to run? No. Did I resist in any way? No. Did I have any tools commonly used in break-ins? Lockpicks, crowbars, anything like that? No. What was I doing when you found me? Tony hesitated. You were sitting at the desk looking at the computer. Reading documents on the computer screen? Yes. Not deleting files? Not downloading anything to a flash drive? Just reading? That's what it looked like. Daniel nodded. And when you asked me what I was doing, what did I say? You said you were looking for something important. Did I seem nervous? Guilty? Tony paused again, longer this time. No, you seemed calm. Like you had a right to be there. Patricia noticed Walsh shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The smug confidence from earlier had faded from his face. Several people in the courtroom gallery were whispering to each other. Daniel walked back to his table and picked up another document. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit A. Can you identify this? Tony squinted at the paper. It looks like a visitor authorization form. That's exactly what it is. It's a visitor authorization form from Sterling and Associates dated August 15th. Can you read the name on that form? Tony's face went pale. Daniel Cooper. And the time authorized for entry? 9:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Walsh jumped to his feet. Your Honor, I haven't seen this document. Where did this come from? Daniel turned to face the prosecutor. It came from Sterling and Associates' own records, Mr. Walsh. I submitted it to the court clerk this morning along with copies for the prosecution. Perhaps you should check your file. Walsh frantically rifled through his papers while his assistant whispered urgently in his ear. Patricia watched the scene unfold, feeling a strange mix of confusion and curiosity. What on earth was going on here? Daniel turned back to Tony. Mr. Rodriguez, one final question. Did you actually check the authorization system before you filed your incident report? Before you accused me of trespassing? Tony's silence spoke volumes. I'll take that as a no. Daniel looked up at Patricia. No further questions, Your Honor. As Daniel walked back to his table, Patricia noticed his slight smile, not smug or arrogant, just satisfied, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had just proven it. The journalist in the back row was scribbling furiously in his notebook, and even the court reporter looked impressed. Patricia glanced at the clock. They'd been at this for less than 20 minutes, and already the prosecution's case was falling apart. This wasn't the work of some kid who'd watched too much television. This was something else entirely. She studied Daniel more carefully now. The messy hair and worn hoodie suddenly seemed less like carelessness and more like camouflage. Who was this boy really? And what had he stumbled into that night at Sterling and Associates? Patricia had a feeling she was about to find out, and something told her the answer was going to surprise everyone in this courtroom. Patricia called for a 15-minute recess. She needed to think, and from the look on Walsh's face, he needed to regroup. As the courtroom cleared, she gestured for both Walsh and Daniel to approach the bench. My chambers. Now, both of you. They filed into her office behind the courtroom. Patricia closed the door and turned to face them, her arms crossed. Walsh looked like he'd just been slapped. Daniel stood quietly, his hands in his pockets again, waiting. All right, Mr. Cooper, Patricia said, her voice low and serious. I've been doing this job for a long time, and I know when something doesn't add up. That performance out there, that wasn't some teenager winging it. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every question was precise. Every move was calculated. So I'm going to ask you one time, and I want the truth. Who are you really? Daniel looked at Walsh, then back at Patricia. May I speak freely, Your Honor? Please do. Because right now I'm about 2 seconds away from holding someone in contempt, and I haven't decided who yet. Daniel pulled a worn wallet from his back pocket and took out a card. He handed it to Patricia. She looked at it, blinked, and looked again. It was a bar card from the State Bar of California. The name read Daniel Cooper. The admission date made her jaw drop. You're an attorney? She looked up at him, disbelief written across her face. Yes, Your Honor. I passed the bar exam when I was 15. I'm 19 now. Walsh grabbed the card from Patricia's hand, staring at it like it might be fake. That's impossible. You can't be a lawyer at 15. It's rare, but it's legal, Daniel said calmly. California doesn't have an age requirement for the bar exam, only educational requirements. I finished my bachelor's degree online when I was 13, went to law school at 14, and took the bar at 15. Patricia sat down heavily in her chair. So this whole thing, the hoodie, the messy hair, pretending you didn't have a lawyer, that was all an act? Not entirely. I really don't have a lawyer because I am a lawyer. But yes, the appearance was strategic. Strategic for what? Walsh demanded, his face reddening. Why would you let us charge you with trespassing if you had authorization to be there? Daniel's expression grew serious. Because I wasn't just at Sterling and Associates to visit someone, Mr. Walsh. I was there on official business. I'm working with the State Attorney General's office on an investigation. Patricia felt her stomach drop. An investigation into what? Into Sterling and Associates. They're one of the most respected law firms in this city. but they're also one of the most corrupt. For the past 8 months, I've been gathering evidence that they've been fabricating evidence, bribing witnesses, and tampering with court records. They've sent innocent people to prison while protecting criminals who can afford their fees. The room went silent. Patricia could hear the clock on her wall ticking. Each second felt heavy. "That's a serious accusation," she said quietly. Daniel reached into his backpack and pulled out a large manila envelope sealed with official tape. "This contains authorization from Attorney General Mitchell's office along with a summary of what we found so far. Your Honor, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you earlier, but the investigation required secrecy. We couldn't risk anyone at Sterling finding out." Patricia broke the seal and pulled out the documents inside. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. Walsh looked over her shoulder, his anger slowly transforming into shock. There were bank records showing suspicious payments to expert witnesses, emails discussing how to manipulate evidence, testimony from a court clerk who'd been paid to alter filing dates on documents, and there, near the bottom of the stack, was a case number that made Patricia's blood run cold. Case number CR 2020-8847. She remembered that case. She'd presided over it 5 years ago. A young woman named Cristina Martinez had been convicted of embezzling money from her employer. The evidence had seemed solid at the time. The woman had cried on the stand, insisting she was innocent, but the documents didn't lie. At least that's what Patricia had thought. "This case," Patricia whispered, holding up the file. "The Martinez case. Are you telling me the evidence was fabricated?" Daniel nodded solemnly. "Every document that convicted her was created by Sterling and Associates. The company she worked for was their client. They wanted her gone, so Sterling made it happen. She's been in prison for 5 years for a crime she didn't commit." Patricia felt sick. She'd sent an innocent woman to prison. She'd looked that woman in the eyes and sentenced her based on lies. The weight of it hit her like a physical blow. "How many cases?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At least 40 that we've confirmed so far. Maybe more. Sterling has been doing this for years, and they've gotten away with it because they're careful. They target vulnerable people, immigrants, poor defendants, people without resources to fight back. And they do it all while maintaining this perfect reputation as champions of justice." Walsh dropped into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "This is impossible. I've worked with Sterling attorneys before. They seemed professional, ethical. That's what makes them so dangerous," Daniel said. "They don't look like villains. They look like heroes. But behind closed doors, they're destroying lives for profit." Patricia stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Cristina Martinez was sitting in a cell, paying for a crime she didn't commit. How many others were there? How many lives had been ruined while she sat on her bench, trusting that the system worked? "Why didn't you just give this evidence to the authorities?" Patricia asked, still staring out the window. "Why go through with a court case?" "Because Sterling has connections everywhere, Your Honor. Police officers, prosecutors, even judges. We couldn't know who might tip them off. The only way to expose them was to catch them in the act, publicly, where they couldn't make it disappear. When they charged me with trespassing, I saw an opportunity, a chance to bring everything into the light where everyone could see it." Patricia turned back to face him. This young attorney, had risked everything to expose corruption that she should have seen herself. He'd let himself be arrested, charged, and mocked in her courtroom, all to get to this moment. "There's more, isn't there?" she asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "Much more. And Your Honor, some of it involves people you know, people you've trusted." The afternoon sun filtered through the window blinds, casting long shadows across Patricia's office. She thought about her 25 years on the bench, all the cases she'd heard, all the verdicts she'd delivered. How many of them had been built on lies? "All right, Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I think it's time we went back into that courtroom and let everyone know what's really going on here." They walked back into the courtroom together. The murmuring stopped as soon as people saw Patricia's face. She looked different now, harder, determined. Walsh walked beside her, looking pale, and Patricia took her seat and looked out at the courtroom. The gallery had filled up during the recess. Word must have spread that something unusual was happening. The journalist from earlier was now joined by 2 others, all of them watching with keen interest. "This court will come to order," Patricia said, her voice carrying through the room. "Before we continue, I need to address something important. Mr. Walsh, I'm dismissing the charges against Daniel Cooper effective immediately." A wave of surprised whispers rolled through the courtroom. Furthermore, Patricia continued, raising her voice slightly, Mr. Cooper has presented evidence to this court that transforms the nature of these proceedings entirely. Mr. Cooper, you have my permission to present your findings. Daniel stood and walked to the center of the courtroom. He didn't look like a scared teenager anymore. He looked like what he really was, a lawyer with a job to do. Thank you, Your Honor. What I'm about to share may be difficult to hear, but it's important that everyone understands what's been happening in our justice system. He paused, making eye contact with people throughout the courtroom. For the past 8 months, I've been working with the State Attorney General's office to investigate Sterling and Associates. What we've discovered is one of the largest legal corruption schemes in state history. Daniel pulled out a folder thick with documents. Sterling and Associates hasn't just been practicing law. They've been manipulating it. They've fabricated evidence in dozens of cases. They've paid expert witnesses to lie under oath. They've bribed court officials to alter records and change filing dates. And they've done all of this while maintaining their reputation as one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Someone in the gallery gasped. The journalists were writing frantically. The evidence is extensive, Daniel continued. We have bank records showing payments to witnesses who later provided crucial testimony in trials. We have emails between Sterling partners discussing which evidence to create and which to destroy. We have recorded phone conversations where they planned how to frame innocent people. He placed a stack of documents on the evidence table. These are copies of 43 cases we've confirmed were affected by Sterling's actions. 43 cases where evidence was manufactured. 43 people who were convicted based on lies. Patricia felt the weight of those words settle over the courtroom. 43 lives destroyed. 43 families torn apart. And for what? Money? Power? The thought made her sick. Daniel's voice grew quieter but more intense. One of those cases was heard in this very courtroom 5 years ago. Cristina Martinez was convicted of embezzlement, based entirely on documents that Sterling and Associates created. She's currently serving an 8-year sentence at Riverside Women's Correctional Facility. She has a daughter who was 10 years old when her mother was taken away. That daughter is 15 now and has spent a third of her life visiting her mom in prison. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. She remembered that little girl. She'd sat in the front row during the trial, crying quietly while holding her grandmother's hand. But Cristina Martinez isn't the only victim, Daniel said. There's Robert Chen, who lost his business and his reputation when Sterling framed him for insurance fraud. There's Angela Williams, who spent 3 years in prison for a theft she didn't commit. There's David Torres, who lost custody of his children based on falsified reports. The list goes on and on. He pulled out another document. Sterling didn't do this alone. They had help from people inside the system. A court clerk named Brian Foster was paid $25,000 to alter filing dates on evidence. An expert witness, Dr. Helen Grant, received over $100,000 across multiple cases to provide false testimony, and a private investigator named Rick Morrison was paid to create fake surveillance reports. The courtroom was completely silent now. Everyone was listening, hanging on every word. But the worst part, Daniel said, his voice dropping, is who Sterling was protecting while they were destroying innocent lives. They used their corruption to shield actual criminals. Drug dealers walked free because Sterling hid evidence. White-collar criminals continued stealing millions because Sterling made witnesses disappear. Violent offenders avoided prison because Sterling knew how to work the system. He turned to face Patricia directly. Your Honor, Sterling and Associates has made a mockery of justice. They've turned our legal system into a weapon that hurts the vulnerable and protects the guilty. They've corrupted the very foundation of what we're supposed to stand for: truth, fairness, and the rule of law. Patricia looked at Walsh, who nodded slowly. He'd reviewed the evidence in her chambers. He knew it was real. Mr. Cooper, Patricia said carefully, these are extremely serious allegations. What you're describing amounts to a conspiracy that involves multiple people across different institutions. Do you have sufficient evidence to support all of this? Yes, Your Honor. Everything I've stated can be backed up with documentation, recordings, and testimony from witnesses who are ready to come forward. The Attorney General's office has been building this case carefully. We have financial records, email trails, phone records, and sworn statements. We even have a former Sterling associate who's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Daniel pulled out one more folder, this one sealed with official tape. This contains the full report, including names of everyone involved. Your Honor, I'm formally requesting that this evidence be entered into the public record. The people of this state deserve to know what's been done in the name of justice." Patricia reached for her gavel, then paused. This moment would change everything. Once that evidence became public, there would be no going back. Careers would be destroyed. The legal community would be thrown into chaos. People would lose faith in the system. But they should lose faith in it, she thought. Because right now the system is broken, and the only way to fix it is to expose just how broken it really is. "Before I make my ruling," Patricia said, "I want everyone in this courtroom to understand something. What we've heard today is painful. It challenges everything we believe about justice and fairness, but hiding from the truth won't make it go away. The only way forward is through honesty, accountability, and a commitment to do better." She picked up her gavel. "I'm accepting this evidence into the public record. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate review of every case mentioned in Mr. Cooper's report, and I'm calling for a full investigation into all parties involved in this conspiracy." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. "This court is adjourned." As people began to file out, talking in hushed, urgent voices, Patricia sat back in her chair. Through her window, she could see the sun setting over the city. Somewhere out there, Christina Martinez was probably having dinner in a prison cafeteria, not knowing that her life was about to change, not knowing that the truth was finally coming to light. Patricia looked at Daniel, who was quietly packing his documents back into his worn backpack. This young man had done what she should have done years ago. He'd looked at the system, seen its flaws, and had the courage to fight back. She'd mocked him when he first walked in. She'd judged him by his appearance and assumed he was just another foolish kid, but he'd taught her the most important lesson of her career. Never underestimate someone who's fighting for what's right. 3 weeks later, Patricia sat in her chambers reading the morning newspaper. The headline stretched across the entire front page. 12 attorneys arrested in massive corruption. Scandal. Below it was a photo of 3 senior partners from Sterling and Associates being led out of their office building in handcuffs. She'd watched it all unfold like dominoes falling. First came the arrests, lawyers, witnesses, court officials. Then the media frenzy as reporters dug deeper into the story. Then the emergency hearings as case after case was reopened for review. The legal community was in chaos, exactly as she'd predicted. But it was the kind of chaos that needed to happen. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her clerk. "Christina Martinez, hearing in courtroom 3. Thought you'd want to know." Patricia stood up immediately and headed down the hallway. She wasn't presiding over the hearing, but she needed to be there. She needed to see this with her own eyes. The courtroom was packed. Christina Martinez sat at the defense table with her attorney. She looked thinner than Patricia remembered, with streaks of gray in her dark hair that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Next to her sat a teenage girl, her daughter now 15. The girl held her mother's hand tightly like she was afraid to let go. Judge Morrison, who was handling the case review, read through the findings. The evidence against Christina had been entirely fabricated. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of financial data, all of it created by Sterling and Associates at the request of her former employer who wanted her gone. The real embezzler had been the company's CFO, who'd paid Sterling handsomely to make Christina take the fall. "Ms. Martinez," Judge Morrison said, his voice gentle, "on behalf of this court and this state, I want to apologize for the injustice you've suffered. Your conviction is hereby overturned. All charges are dismissed. You're free to go." Christina started crying. Her daughter wrapped her arms around her mother, sobbing into her shoulder. Patricia felt tears burning in her own eyes. She'd been a judge long enough to see plenty of emotional moments. But this one hit different. This was her case. Her mistake. Her responsibility. After the hearing ended, Patricia waited outside the courtroom. When Christina emerged with her daughter, Patricia approached them carefully. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Judge Harrington. I presided over your original trial." Christina looked at her, and for a moment Patricia wasn't sure what she'd see in those eyes. Anger? Hatred? She would have deserved both. Instead, Christina just looked tired. "I remember you," she said quietly. "I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. I should have seen through their lies. I should have questioned the evidence more carefully. I failed you and I failed your daughter, and there's nothing I can say that will give you back those 5 years." Christina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You didn't know." They fooled everyone. Even my own lawyer believed I was guilty. She squeezed her daughter's hand. "What matters now is that the truth came out. That's more than a lot of people get." Her daughter looked up at Patricia with red-rimmed eyes. "Is my mom really free? They can't take her back?" "She's really free," Patricia said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "And the people who did this to her are going to prison instead. I promise you that." The girl nodded, then turned back to her mother, hugging her tightly. Patricia watched them walk away together, Christina's arm around her daughter's shoulders. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Over the next few months, 17 wrongful convictions were overturned. 17 people walked out of prison and back into their lives. It wasn't all of them. Some cases were too old, evidence had been destroyed, witnesses had died or disappeared. But 17 was 17 families put back together, 17 futures returned. The scandal didn't end with Sterling and Associates either. The investigation expanded as more evidence surfaced. 2 judges were forced to resign after it was discovered they'd accepted bribes. A senior prosecutor lost his law license for looking the other way. The entire system was being shaken to its foundations, and while it was painful, Patricia believed it was necessary. She saw Daniel one more time, about 6 months after that day in court. He stopped by her chambers unannounced, still wearing jeans and a hoodie, though she noticed this one didn't have holes in it. "I wanted to thank you," he said, sitting in the chair across from her desk. "You could have buried the evidence. You could have said it needed to go through proper channels first. But you didn't. You put it on the record right there in open court." Patricia shook her head. "I did what I should have done years ago. You're the one who deserves thanks. You risked everything to expose this corruption." "Someone had to," Daniel said with a slight shrug. "I became a lawyer because I believed in justice. Real justice, not the kind Sterling was selling. When I found out what they were doing, I couldn't just walk away." "What will you do now?" Patricia asked. "I heard you turned down job offers from half the firms in the state." Daniel smiled. "I'm starting my own practice. Small cases mostly. People who can't afford the big firms. People who've been hurt by the system and need someone to fight for them. There's a lot of work to do. You know you'll probably never get rich doing that kind of work. I didn't become a lawyer to get rich. I became a lawyer to help people." He stood up to leave, then paused. "You know what the funny thing is? Everyone kept underestimating me because I looked young. They'd see the hoodie and the messy hair and think I was just some kid who didn't know what he was doing. That made them careless. They'd say things in front of me they never would have said to someone in a suit." Patricia laughed softly. "So the appearance was strategic." "Everything's strategic when you're trying to catch criminals," Daniel said with a grin. "You taught me that, actually. That first day in court when you assumed I didn't know what I was doing. That's when I knew my cover was perfect." After he left, Patricia sat at her desk thinking about everything that had changed. She thought about Cristina Martinez and her daughter, finally living together again. She thought about the 16 other people who'd gotten their lives back. She thought about the corrupt lawyers and officials who were now facing justice themselves. The system wasn't perfect. It probably never would be, but it was better now than it had been 6 months ago. And it would keep getting better as long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, even when it was hard. Even when they were underestimated and mocked. Even when the whole world thought they were just foolish kids who didn't know any better. Patricia picked up a file from her desk. Another case, another trial, another chance to get it right. She thought about Daniel's words. Everything's strategic. Maybe it was time she started looking deeper, questioning more, trusting less. Not everyone in a suit was honest, and not everyone in a hoodie was a criminal. Sometimes the heroes didn't look like heroes at all. Sometimes they looked like scruffy teenagers who were easy to dismiss and even easier to underestimate. And sometimes those were exactly the people who changed the world. Patricia opened the file and began to read, paying attention to every detail, questioning every piece of evidence, determined never to make the same mistake again. Outside her window, the sun was shining over the city. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably meeting with his first client, ready to fight another battle for justice, and somewhere else, Cristina Martinez was making dinner with her daughter, doing ordinary things that weren't ordinary at all, when you'd spent 5 years believing you'd never do them again. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. But today, justice had won. And that was enough to keep going.